Good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation today. I'm Karen Andres, the project director of the Retirement Savings Initiative here at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. We're so glad to have you here. Today we're talking about better technology, better retirement savings, why operations and administrative technology matters for saver outcomes. Today's conversation is co-hosted by the Aspen Financial Security Program and the Aspen Future of Work Initiative as part of a two-part conversation series on digitally enabled, people-centric retirement savings. New and emerging technologies are increasingly impacting every facet of our world, not just by offering new tools or transferring existing processes into the cloud, but really by fundamentally reshaping how we approach and solve problems. So in a strange way, today's conversation is fundamentally a financial inclusion conversation. So many of us here today on the event, those of us speaking and those of us sort of in the audience listening in, work together in different ways to expand access to the 50 million workers in America who do not have a workplace savings program. And these are workers who are disproportionately low-wage workers and workers of color. But as we work to make the system more inclusive, we also need to make sure that we have a workplace savings system that really works and is really effective for folks once they have access to it. So today's conversation focuses on technologies that can improve the operations and the administration of savings, the systems and the infrastructure on which our retirement system operates. As our speakers will discuss, these in-the-weeds topics can have big ramifications for how savers experience, use, and benefit from America's workplace retirement savings system. We're proud to present this event with support from and in partnership with Cognizant. And please remember to also register for the second event in this series on March 10th. That's Better Technology, Better Retirement Savings. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here for a second. Exploring the digital tools that improve user experience. One more reminder for you, please do submit questions as we move through the conversation today using the chat function, and we'll be watching for questions we want to toss into the conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ann Lester, a media commentator, speaker, and author, pretty well known in the retirement space. Ann has many years of experience of innovation in retirement plan design. So Ann, I'd like to invite you to turn on your camera and your mic and take us away.
Thank you very much, Karen. And just let me first and foremost say thank you so much for organizing this conversation to the Aspen Institute and to Cognizant. I think it is certainly one that in my over 25 years of experience working in the retirement industry at JP Morgan Asset Management prior to my retirement that I have seen and lived viscerally. So I think there's nothing more important than thinking about the ways we can get more people engaged and get that access broadened, because we do know that the workplace retirement savings has proven to be one of the most consistent and durable ways for individuals in all levels of society to start building wealth. So for me, this is just a hugely important conversation, and one that I'm incredibly pleased to be hosting. Before I introduce our panelists today, what I'd like to do is to ask that we pull up a few definitions of terms that we're going to be talking about today. And these terms are ones that I think many of us, feel like we know, but just to help us understand and level set a little bit. Just to summarize, automation. When we say automation, we really mean substituting a process that's using technology to replace a human. And it might be something as simple as pre-populating someone's 401k enrollment form and can get a lot more sophisticated than that. Artificial intelligence would be the ability of a computer to perform a task typically associated with a human being. So to make a decision, to understand something, to let you know something about data that it's able to see. An algorithm, I always, there's sort of a running joke that there's an algorithm for that, but an algorithm is nothing more than an equation. And in fact, I was doing a little web surfing, looking for examples of some of these things. And one of the websites I was on pointed out that a recipe to bake is an algorithm, right? It's a set of instructions that you follow over and over again. And not always me if I'm baking, but hopefully you end up with the same result every single time you follow those instructions in the same way. Now, machine learning takes that same concept of an algorithm and automatically improves it over time. So you can sense that the algorithm sees what doesn't work and what does work, and then hones those recommendations over time. And a classic example of this might be Netflix, recommending better and better films that more and more match your viewing preferences the longer you watch things on Netflix. Now, the next two terms are often conflated and thrown about, I think, interchangeably, but it's important to understand how they're different, I think, especially as we start talking about retirement and investing. The first is distributed ledger, and that at its most simple is a database. Think about it as a spreadsheet, or back in the Middle Ages, apparently these distributed ledger concepts were actually used to keep track of records across countries. But distributed ledger means nothing more than something that is jointly owned by multiple people who can simultaneously enter information into it, and it is simultaneously updated for everyone. And the huge advantage of a distributed ledger technology is that it is much more secure than one single thing that could be hacked or interrupted somehow or be subject to some sort of failure. So it's viewed to be a very, very much more robust ability for information to be shared and information to be managed. Now, blockchain takes that distributed ledger and links it together in a transaction. And that's how we typically think of things like cryptocurrency. Everybody thinks of Bitcoin when they hear blockchain, but it really is an application of distributed ledger technology that creates a transaction. So with that as a backdrop, what I'd like to do now is to invite my panelists to join me on the screen. And what we're going to do is go through a quick round of introductions. And in doing my introductions, I'm going to ask you to do something that we often do in live conferences, which is, instead of repeating our bio or have me read your bio, ask you instead to tell the audience something that is not in your bio. So let's call it a fun fact. And then I'd also like you to share an experience that you've had with technology that could be fixed. Right? What's something that you are personally, either as a consumer or as in your professional role, have observed about, especially the retirement technology system that isn't working? So I'll kick it off and just say my fun fact that many people are surprised to learn is that I played rugby for 3 years in college in the scrum. So I was out there duking it out with folks head to head in a very violent physical sport, actually, and it was a lot of fun. And I want to share my technology story is just watching how hard it is to shift a retirement plan from one record keeping system to another, and the amount of time and energy and the errors that get made, because a lot of it often involves either systems that don't talk well to one another, trying to communicate, in a lot of manual typing and correction, or it involves a lot of typing, and when people type, they make mistakes. So it's a very difficult process to get right, and one that absorbs a huge amount of energy when anybody is involved in making any changes to a retirement plan. So with that, maybe Mira, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everyone. The fun fact about me is I cook and I clean and organize. So if I cook more, that means I've had a more stressful day. So that's the way I mean, after a long work day, if I'm scrubbing the bathroom floors or mopping the floor or cleaning, that's me. In terms of technology, my experience is similar to Anne's, but from a slightly different persona type, as a saver, as a person holding for multiple 401ks. I can still tell you, I wish I had a single screen to see all of that. With so much technology available, I have to still do a spreadsheet to see what my retirement income is going to be. And that to me is my technology aha.
Thanks, Mira. Tim, how about you?
Well, thank you, Anne. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm the executive director of Spark, and we're the trade association for the U.S. retirement industry. So I guess the one fun fact that I have is that after graduating from college, I spent a year in South Korea teaching English to business executives at the Ryman Noodle plant. Kind of, I guess it was kind of like English course, a basic English course in Bill Murray's movie Stripes. So, if the tech issue that I see quite often, because I communicate a lot with plan sponsors, and trying to get the sense of what's on the mind of the plan sponsor. And bringing financial wellness to the masses really is an issue. And I speak to employers who recognize the need to address financial stress in the workplace and its effects on absenteeism, presenteeism, even health costs, right? They want and solicit our industry for financial wellness programs. They'll hire one, and then they tell me that the firms come in and immediately want to meet with the high net wealth individuals. And the employers turn around and say, that's not where my problem is. My problem is with the younger, lower paid employees who are struggling with student loan debt and others. And your industry doesn't seem to have an interest in those folks. So that's a problem that I think that can be fixed with technology. And I think that's where we probably need to focus a lot.
Thanks, Tim. And Michael, let's get you in this conversation now.
Well, it's just an honor to be here, and particularly on a panel moderated by the great Ann Lester. Ann and I used to work together at JP Morgan, and I just think she's a star, and I'm glad that she's going to continue to express her voice in this industry because I think it's an important one. Just by way of background, I run the DC specialist team at T. Rowe Price. And then I guess a fun fact would be, and I'll stick with the theme of technology. My 11-year-old son and I embarked on a project to build our own computer. Now, he got this idea from a friend of his in his class. Of course, his dad is head of technology at a hedge fund. I am not. So this was quite a daunting task, but over a period of about 3 weeks and lots of anxiety and stress, we got that done. And it just convinced us both that you take on something, you can finish it, even if it feels daunting. I would say from a sort of a technology as it applies to retirement, I would say, you know, a lot of the issues that I have noticed have certainly been mentioned. This issue of portability, the issue of sort of aggregating your assets in one place. I would also, in financial wellness, I would add the advice discussion into that. Just having sort of a technology platform that gives you good advice on the totality of assets that you have in a way that's easily consumable and gives you messages when you need them in a way that you can consume them. I think that is a problem that we've seen for quite some time and one that I think tech could really address.
Well, thanks so much. And hopefully, you know, you've got a good sense for who the panelists are and maybe a little bit more than you knew before. I'd like to turn now to talking a little bit about why, you know, we've talked about some of the specific problems, but what I'd really like to do is spend a minute or two level setting on why this is so important for the end participant. Like we've talked about, you know, how messy it can be for service providers or how complicated it can be, and other dimensions of this. But if you're that saver, perhaps one who doesn't have access to a plan or one who's not using a plan, right? Why is transforming this technology so important? And Michael, I'm going to ask you to kick us off here, and maybe if you can speak to that, not just from your experience working as a service provider, but maybe also put yourself in the shoes of some of your clients who are plan sponsors and, you know, really dealing with the end consumer in this instance.
Yeah, well, it's an important question. And, you know, I haven't mentioned, but part of my bio is I spent some time in government. I was in the Labor Department for 4 years, and we would look at this problem at a systemic level. And I would say one of the biggest challenges that I think can be addressed is leakage. And leakage is just such a source of pain for so many people. So leakage is when you have savings, you've amassed savings, may not be a lot, maybe a little, but you change plans, you go to another company and you don't take those assets with you. And certainly if those assets are de minimis, you don't roll them over, you forget about them, or you take a loan from your plan, you never replace the money in the account. I just think that friction that happens is a great source of challenge for a lot of people in our markets. And I think technology can really help with that. One, just to keep track of the savings and where they are. And you talked about distributed ledger and blockchain. I do think that kind of technology in terms of connecting a lot of these systems that don't speak to each other. So you have a lot of different private actors in the marketplace. and the systems aren't always as communicative as they could be, right? So if you're going from one system to another, are they talking adequately? Is it easy to really connect those conversations together? And for a lot of people, that process is way too mechanical, way too difficult, and it's caused problems for a lot of our savers across the country.
Thanks, Michael. Mira, how about you?
So for me, as a saver, we always say it's about your financial wellness. So technology that delivers transparency, increases awareness, provides motivation to save more, and completely demystifies this whole, oh, retirement is not something that I should think about now, is what I would say are requirements from a saver standpoint. Much like what Michael said, right? Yeah, blockchain, other ways. But as a saver, when I log in, I need to know what's in there. There should be transparency around my data. Yes, security is important, privacy is important, regulation, compliance are all important. But as a saver, if I am in control of the outcome, I can do a lot of things. And that's why I would insist on transparency as a key thing.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, anything you'd add here that we haven't mentioned yet?
Yes, sure. And Michael touched on this, and Mira touched on this as well. And I mentioned it earlier about the younger, lower paid employees. If these workers can't, if we can't address the pressing financial concerns of this group of participants, whether it's student loan repayments or dealing with emergency savings, as Michael pointed out, with leakage, we're less likely to get that group of people to join the retirement system. And so it's critically important that we don't create a bifurcated system that's not addressing the entire population.
And I'm just going to throw in one more thought here before we go to the hard question of the day. We'll get that run right out of the way in a minute here. But from my perspective, a lot of what I observed was, the cost and complexity for small employers, and how can we use technology to both simplify the experience for the small employer, and I'm talking about people with 5, 10, 15, 20 employees, and drive the price down. And so I do think that there's some legislative initiatives underway, certainly in different states as well as at the national level, that would be creating some better mechanisms there that have already been enacted, but also more under discussion. But also, I think very importantly, just thinking about using technology to drive pricing down, especially at the small end of the market. So I think that's another big place that we could see that access and expense being improved for the individual. So now here's what I hope is going to be the hardest question. We'll see if it is. When we think about technology transformation, right? I can look at my iPhone and compare it to the brick that I carried around in 1995 and felt ever so cool with this giant thing that I had. I can look at with envy at my brother's Tesla and imagine, someday when I'm going to have a cool automatic, car that can drive itself, that is a completely different user experience. And maybe the Tesla is the right comparison. If we think about, what technology can do today, which is that Tesla, and compare it to, I don't know, the Dodge Dart that my grandparents drove, right? I mean, both cars get you there safely. They both work. They both meet minimum safety standards. But I give in the Dodge Dart's use of this innovative, transformative technology, I'd give that in that context, not is it safe and will it get you there, but in the context of how is it using that new technology, I'd give it an F. So with that kind of grading system as a background, what grade would you give the retirement system for leveraging the technology that we already know exists to improve things? So how good is the system today at taking technology that has been tested and used in other industries or in other applications and incorporating that into the 401k record system? And I don't know if we've got a volunteer to fall on that sword first here. Tim, I see you raising your hand there. Tim, you're up.
Sure, I'm happy to get started. I know I read Aspen's recap of the industry roundtable discussion from I think in the fall, and saw that the retirement industry executives gave themselves a D grade. I don't know that I would be as tough a grader on the industry as they seem to have been on themselves. The industry has, as you point out, invested a tremendous amount in driving down cost of administering plans, which has opened up plans for a huge number of American workers. There's My members record keep the accounts for over 100 million American workers today. And they've developed a, to your point about the car, and I think that's a great analogy. We have created a good and safe vehicle for bringing people towards retirement. It's the most popular retirement plan in the United States. Of the people who have plans, participation rates are up in the high 80%. We've accumulated trillions of dollars in the system and are envied by most industrialized economies around the world. So the consumer has been rewarded, and so I don't think I would give them a D. But are there things that can be improved? Yes, absolutely. There are things that, without a doubt, can be improved on, and I think this is a great venue for discussing those.
So maybe a C, if I'm going to put a word into your mouth there. I don't know. All right. Mira, how about you?
I would give it a C because I think I agree that yes, it's been an envy of a lot of other countries and economies who do not have this. But have we, as an industry, put all the technologies available to us to our advantage? I would say in bits and pieces, yes. Most of it is done to maybe reduce cost and get better and get efficient. But have we made use of this technology to make a saver more self-aware of where they are going, the outcomes and all of it, using the power of data? I think we have ways to go there.
Michael, anything to add there?
Well, I would just, I agree with what's been said. I guess I would give us maybe a C-. And I don't really think that a lot of it is because of the availability of technology or the application of it. I think that we have a lot of work to do with the regulatory environment around how we use data. We also have very distinctive data privacy laws that make it hard to share. And you saw this play out a bit with the pandemic in China, where China was able to very quickly link into phones. They had a whole system that would sort of follow you around, that they could tell you if you'd been exposed, and if so, you had to be quarantined. People in the United States might be horrified that the government would know exactly where they were at all times. So I do think that we have a cultural dynamic that's a little different than other parts of the world that makes it hard to share information in a pooled way. So it's not all the system's fault, but I think government has to be a good partner in this effort with industry to be able to move us forward in a way that data can be shared more easily.
So when we think about, beyond the human cost, if you will, and the consequences of maybe that saver, as you mentioned, Mira, not having the ability to be self-aware or to understand how much better or more powerful this benefit could be for them. What are some of the other risks that you see being created by this outmoded or clunky, and again, whether it's a manual process or a lack of information sharing? And Mira, I'll go to you first on that.
So one is the potential of the employees losing track of where the benefit goes. That's one. Two is with going back to Michael's point on regulation. There's so much about, hey, is it an unbiased way in the way the benefits are done? There's so much audit that happens post facto on all of these. Rather than doing it in the hindsight, is there a way to have it all shifted to the left so that people are more aware of that? The sponsors and the providers, if awareness there. The unbiased advice has become a big deal now in the market. So are the savers offered unbiased advice? Is it always going through an advisor, or can we use technology to give that? How much of bias is there? And one can also argue that even technology needs to be programmed, and there could be bias in technology as well, but as much as possible, can that be removed? And last but not the least, the challenge of converting benefits into sustainable retirement income. That always can be done better by use of technology.
So Michael, do you want to comment maybe specifically on that last point? Is there a risk there as people think about taking their life savings, and is that someplace that technology could help? In
terms of taking the savings out of the system?
Yeah.
Oh, without question. that was an example I didn't use. I went around pricing annuities a few weeks ago just to get a sense of, if I wanted to set up my own annuity personally, how much would that cost? And it was incredibly expensive, I will tell you, just given our
Yeah.
interest rates are. And just the thought of how you would sort of deploy the assets that you've saved in the various savings programs that you've been a part of and move them into an annuity. If you were to do that, it's not a simple process. And this is where, our grade could be a lot higher. If you look at what some other countries have done in Europe and Australia, how they've created that sort of portability to be able to move seamlessly from being in plan to out of plan. That is a tremendous opportunity for this country. And I would say that we're pretty far behind where we need to be in that regard.
So, and Tim, I'll kick this over to you. Why isn't some of this happening, or more of it happening maybe? Like, is there a challenge with incentives, or whose job it is to improve things? And I guess I'll just say, when I was, in my former role, I was a service provider, plugging into a complex industry with many different, an ecosystem, I guess, with many different actors. And, each individual actor would have benefited from a transformation. And I think if everybody had agreed that it needed to be done, even would have been comfortable at cost sharing across that. And I'm talking about the actors being the plan sponsor, the asset manager, the record keeper, and the custodian, right? There are all these different actors in the system. Each individual actor only has an incentive to try to drive their costs down as much as possible. And so, how do we get over that? How do we, it's the classic sort of economics problem of a common good that nobody wants to pay for, but we'd all benefit from, but nobody wants to go first. Like, how do we get out of this trap?
You're absolutely right. I mean, we brought the industry together in late 2019. We had over 60 folks participating, and we were examining the application of blockchain technology and distributed ledgers, right? So we were looking at what could potentially, the benefits of those technologies could be on our industry. And there was probably 24 different ideas. And a lot of them were ideas that would benefit the industry. But if you think about that type of technology, it requires the industry to kind of all work together. And you hit it spot on. Record keeping margins have been low and continue to go low, because that's the only yardstick that we've been using to measure one vendor versus another. And we've kind of, obviously cost is a key driver, but until we have other factors that can be effectively used, plan sponsors are going to naturally just kind of go towards the lowest provider. And that's always a disincentive for investments in innovation. Coming out of that blockchain discussion, we ended up voting on 2 areas that we thought would be really beneficial for the industry from a security perspective, from a seamless integration perspective. And that was the creation of two chains, one for plan sponsor or employee benefits, and the second chain was a chain for participants. So going back to comments that were made earlier about the free flow of data, imagine a system where you're no longer, to Ann, your point about typing in information, you're no longer doing that. What you're doing is giving access. It's encrypted on everyone's account, but you're giving access from one provider to another provider. So
I'm seeing some head nodding from the other panelists. Anybody want to jump in there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Mira.
Michael.
No, you go ahead, Mira.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree. Blockchain is one concept, but in general, my point of view is the responsibility lies with all the parties, right? The employers or the sponsors and the providers. It cannot be one entity's responsibility. And if all the parties come together to make this happen and influence the policymakers, aka regulators, I have a feeling sometimes we use regulators as an excuse. So there can be more lobby power there if these parties come together.
I do think there may be a lesson learned from how quickly people were able to pivot, as it were, when March rolled around last year, and everybody suddenly figured out ways of radically changing the way we worked. And I know my Gen Z son, who had heard me say, "Well, it's complicated," it's like, "It's not that complicated, Mom. You just do it." So, Michael, as a former regulator, what do you say to that one?
Well, I appreciate Mira's points about it's not all the regulators is used as an excuse, because I think they can be used as a boogeyman, and I don't think that is entirely fair. I do think that Tim's point is well taken though, because this issue of margins and record keeping is real, and we have a fundamentally economic model in this country where to make investments like that, there's got to be an economic benefit that private entities can harvest. Right. And if they don't think they can harvest that benefit over the near term, it's going to be a lot harder to make those investments. I think a lot of the investments that I see that are being made right now are really around mobile technology. I think if you look at optimizing for the telephone first, most people have a telephone, right? And if you can really optimize for that environment, you really can move the needle. And we saw a big uptick in our participants that we record keep and their use of the phone as their primary device for accessing the account. We saw a 40% increase year over year. I mean, that is massive.
And do you think that might just be because people didn't have access to the work computer, or
exactly.
their kid was on Zoom school instead of letting them on?
Well, you've seen this data play out in other ways, in that people are on their phones a lot more now than they were prior to the pandemic, right? So they're transacting a lot more, they're shopping more, they're doing all these things on the phone. And if anything, the pandemic has probably accelerated that trend. So I do think this notion of sort of optimizing for the phone is going to be one that's going to carry us forward. And I think that's a place where a lot of companies can harvest the investment that they make. But for some of these higher level investments, it's harder to see where that is. And that's where I think government needs to step in, right?
Yeah. So Mira, just playing off of that a little bit, and saying, there is some evidence of stuff changing. Would you say that there's any other industries that you think the retirement system could learn from? Any innovations that you're seeing take place somewhere else that you could pull in and say, yeah, that would work here too, or that we should be doing already?
So I would start by saying I hate to be compared to other industries. Being an influence in this retirement industry, I don't, but I use this word inspiration. We can always draw inspiration from other industries. Now, I'm very firm of this fact that we are not selling a dozen pens on Amazon. So comparing ourselves and wanting to be Amazon is not going to work, because there's privacy, security, regulations, all of it. The way I would define this is look within the industry itself. The fast money market, like the bankers and all of them, the credit card firms, they move quite fast and they have almost similar privacy, security, and regulatory requirements like ours. So can we draw inspiration from them? And I'm certain that even within the retirement industry, there are pockets that are doing more. So that's what I would draw as inspiration. And the way I look at it is a lot is being done. And Michael is right, mobile is available. People are using. This is not a credit card bill statement that comes to me every month to say you spent more on groceries this month over something else. Retirement is not such thing. It's not a fast money mover. So nobody wants to be looking at it, but is there a way to use the more power of mobile we have, the data we have, to send messages for overall financial wellness? I think that's where some research is happening as we speak. Yes, there will always be the pricing pressure and the back-end cost optimization, which cannot be taken away from any industry, and retirement industry needs to do that, but more about applying these technologies. And I think I would draw inspiration from our big brothers, the financial services and the banking industry.
So Tim, if you think about that question, right, and I like the way you reframe that, Mira, a lot. How can we be inspired by what's going on? And as you talk to your members, what are you seeing them doing? Like where is innovation happening specifically? And I know we've touched on a couple of areas already, but where do you see the most excitement or the most interest or the most actual movement across all the players?
Well, I think the biggest area is in the demand for connectivity of data. We've all talked about that. Mira's talked about that as well. And the demands of participants for holistic financial wellness, both both Mira and Michael both pointed out, however, that you've got this privacy issue. So I think really what we have to navigate going forward, and this isn't just in our industry, obviously it's in a lot of other areas as well, but you've got this recognized, you've got a demand and a need for holistic financial wellness. And that's going to come in collision with privacy, because there's also, people have a natural concern for privacy. And for a financial services firm to offer you the proper amount of advice and guidance, they need to know a lot about you. And so there's a dynamic there that I'm sure we'll figure out, but it's an area that we're going to have to navigate through in the next several years.
And maybe as a pause before you think about sharing data, among different types of players, do you even see movement on data sharing where it would be appropriate? And again, I'm going back to my classic example of transferring files between one company and another that they need to transfer, and even that being an issue. I mean, is some of this just blocking and tackling that has to happen?
Yes, there is. I mean, we're actually in the process now of just creating standards for data that we already are, as individual firms, are sending out today. So a lot of my member firms are dealing with broker dealers who have a need for data. Each of them are sending out different files to different broker dealers it's virtually the same exact information, but it's in slightly different formats, and it costs our industry a lot of money to maintain those files. So that's just an example of the type of inefficiency that the system has by not having sort of a single point of connectivity and standards.
So I'll go back to my earlier question, which is if that is so obviously a pain point for everyone, how come nobody's doing anything about it? I can say this now, not being part of the industry anymore, although I could certainly say from my prior role, right? You're both simultaneously exacerbated by it, and not my problem to fix, right? So why aren't we doing a better job of just that? I mean, that's like blocking and tackling in 101 stuff.
It is, but then you also get into issues of whenever you bring an industry together and you bring competitors together, you always have to be concerned about antitrust and whether or not you're acting in a way that's not anti-competitive and that is pro-competition. So that's always a delicate issue that you need to be addressing. And then it's also a matter of making sure that I think one of the biggest problems that you have with data, right? And I saw this in the blockchain discussion. We had everybody in the room that was representative of the ecosystem. You had payroll providers and record keepers and advisors and consultants and DCIO providers. And every single one of them wants data. The record keepers in the room were looking around and saying, boy, if I could get all the data that the payroll companies had, that would be great. And the payroll companies looked over their shoulder and said, well, I'm not giving them that data. And the advisors in the room said, boy, if I could have all the data that the record keepers have about participants, I would love that. And our record keepers are saying, well, I'm not going to give you that data. So there's no way, we all know that data has value, and we have no easy mechanism of giving people recognizing that value as it goes through the chain. And until we do, I think you're going to have people who are going to hoard the data and keep the data. And I think the only way to resolve it is to figure out a mechanism by which people can be compensated for the data that they have, if it's necessary to be shared. So, just my opinion.
Michael, that seems like an interesting place for you to weigh in from the plan sponsor's perspective, because I do know, again, in my former life, it was obvious to us that there would be some really powerful things we could have done, as both a consumer bank and a 401k provider, if you could integrate some of the data we already had about our own customers, right? And there was a massive Chinese wall there that at the time, and I suspect still now, was there for very good reasons, and no, we couldn't do that. But and I've also remember talking over the years to plan sponsors that originally thought that was a terrible idea, and then more recently thought, well, maybe that would be an interesting way to start solving some of these problems. But so, Michael, just from your perspective, both working with plan sponsors today in this ecosystem, but also maybe from your regulatory perspective and as a voice for that participant from the DOL and fiduciary issues, like I mean, I guess one reaction is I own my own data. Thank you very much. It's mine, and I should be getting the monetary benefit from it. Not all y'all. What do you think about that?
Well, I love the way you framed the question, first of all. So I would just say that going back to the question you asked in the last round, which is an industry that we can learn something from. I've always argued and always thought that there's a lot of parallels between our industry and retirement and the medical field, in that you have very private information that people want to keep private. They don't necessarily want to share it all. There's a tremendous benefit to sharing it, and it's not always clear exactly how to share it. There's also a lot of intimacy that I think people have, certainly with respect to their medical conditions, but the same is true with respect to their savings. And I would see this when I worked at the Labor Department. I get these whispers where people would say, come into my office and they'd pull out their statements, their 401k statements, and they whispered the whole time. I was like, why are we whispering? We're the only two in this room. So I just think that there are a lot of parallels. And I do see the medical field. You have HIPAA, and HIPAA does kind of govern a lot of the sharing and the treatment of that information. There is no HIPAA equivalent in the retirement field. And I think to your immediate question now, as a plan sponsor, you're like, is this information mine? Do I have legal exposure if I share it? Who really owns it? Is it a set lore function, therefore not really governed by ERISA, or is it an ERISA function and me as a fiduciary within that? How is it governed? That's not entirely clear. Now, this issue has been taken up at the Labor Department by the ERISA Advisory Council, and they've made some recommendations here and there. But in essence, that problem has not been solved. So I think if you're a plan sponsor, you may want to go down that path, but because it's unclear, you don't want to create litigation exposure for you and your company.
Mira, anything you want to throw in there in this conversation about innovation and maybe stuff that you're seeing that's working from your seat?
So the only addition I would like to say is every retirement service provider and employer is doing something within their own limits. You may call it tunnel vision sometimes, but something to enhance and bring in innovation. Now, Tim and Michael touched on expanding it, going cross. What about the trust? What about the competitive advantage, disadvantage? And Michael also spoke about, hey, there is no HIPAA and who owns the data. But the point is, if we can all leave that aside and come together and share stuff, that again, consortium is a broad word that I don't want to use, but some way that you don't reinvent the wheel in your own little way, but use it across would be great.
So, Michael, you mentioned a word that I almost grabbed, and then I thought, no, let's not do it. And I just changed my mind. We're going to go there. So litigation, let's talk about litigation and its malign influence on people feeling comfortable taking risk. And I certainly know from personal experience that it is something that even if you're pretty sure something's a good idea, if you're not confident that you won't be sticking your neck out or being first, it's a very, very scary thing to do. And so, maybe just a brief comment from each of you before we open up this conversation to questions from the audience. And I'll just remind people that we have seen a few questions in from the audience, but please ask them now if you'd like us to get them in front of the panelists. We'll be doing that in about a minute. So maybe just a few quick comments on litigation from any of you.
Well, I guess I'll start really quickly. I just think litigation, particularly from a plan sponsor perspective, it just creates an aversion to risk and innovation. Because, as a plan sponsor, you're not being necessarily paid extra to take that kind of risk. And you just don't want to create a risk profile that creates exposure at the company. I think a lot of plan sponsors in their heart of hearts, they want to lean in. They want to lean into these things. They want to do new and different things, but they may have an ERISA counsel at the company that says, wait, you got to be very careful about that. And the other thing we haven't introduced is cybersecurity, right? So if you as a plan sponsor start exposing this data, does it create more breachable openings for someone to come in and steal data? And you definitely don't want that to happen, not only from a litigation perspective, but also from a brand perspective. You never want that.
Yeah. Tim, anything to add that you've heard your members talk about in when they think about what how much of a chilling, effect does that litigation threat have on people's ability to experiment?
Well, Michael's points, particularly about cybersecurity, is spot on. And put yourself in the plan sponsor's seat. The plan sponsor, again, if you're asking them to now add on different levels of services for student loan repayments or for HSAs, and you're adding all these other things on, it's only more responsibility for the plan sponsor, and so there's going to be natural reluctance there. And going back to my earlier comment, historically there has only been one yardstick, and that one yardstick has always been cost. Right. And we just focus on cost. Nobody wants to fly in the cheapest airplane, right? So we don't have enough other effective yardsticks by which plan sponsors can say, yes, I paid more for this, but I paid more for this because, and here's the evidence of why I paid more for it. Courts just seem to be focused strictly on the cost.
Tim, that's a great reminder, and it reminded me of something that my very first boss used to say, who was John Glenn, the senator from Ohio, and he used to tell me that the thing, he said this all the time when he was giving speeches, that the thing that was running through his mind as he was sitting on top of that rocket, ready to blast off into orbit for the first time, was, and I'm sitting on the thing that was the cheapest bid for this rocket, and I don't feel very good about that. So, okay, so we've been getting some fabulous questions in, and I'm gonna start with one that I think is really an interesting one, and one I'm personally interested in hearing your opinions on, which is, will either the state auto IRAs or new 401k platforms like Guideline and others prompt any competition in terms of upgrading tech? In other words, will these upgrades happen, and will we, see through disintermediation maybe an evolution of some of these issues? Anybody want to jump on that, Mira? You're up.
Yeah. So they certainly offer standard plans, with very little customizations, as I understand. So is it going to make the whole competitive stuff that we spoke about go away? My thing is, it's just like any other technology. As long as your plans are simple, they're going to remain the same. But the more you complicate the plan, the more you need to customize it further. So would it completely take away? I suspect it will not. So it certainly, for small employers, that could be a blessing.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? So we've got another question here. I'm going to kind of blow through these quickly. So we just got a couple more minutes left before we wrap up. But interesting thought here, solely with respect to the technology issue. Isn't the real issue, and Mira, maybe this is something we can build on from your complexity question, isn't the real issue that employers control each plan, and most employers are not retirement expert and don't have the staff to design and oversee the system? And if you've got essentially 30 million employers making 30 million decisions, is it possible to ever get there? And I'll just throw in one more thought, which is, would some of the larger employers who've built very customized solutions be willing to step away from some of that complexity by design if there were a better mousetrap out there that was cheaper and simpler to use? And is that something that we can try to work towards, rather than saying we'll build everyone the special thing individually for them? Because that was, I think, the way the industry articulated value propositions, over the last 20 or 30 years. Let me build it specially for you. And if we flip that paradigm around and say, let's think about getting the best outcome for the individual, what do we know will work for that? Maybe you can reverse engineer some of this and make it less complicated.
Yeah, you answered that question very well, and it's in the incentives we provide. What do the employers want? Do they want sophisticated service based on the complicated plans that they want to offer? Great, that comes at a price. But if you want to standardize it and keep it vanilla, your price point is going to be way lesser. So I guess it's a push and a pull. And what are they incentivized for is what is going to bring a huge change. The question is so spot on. If the employers continue to tailor make complex plans, they have to pay a price for that.
So Michael, this is going to put you on the spot. But since you said I was a rock star, I'm going to do it. like how does a regulator handle that? Like, how do you, or back to Tim's comment, like what are the yardsticks we can develop that, I mean, it's easy for me to sit on a soapbox and say, outcome orientation is the right answer. What gives participants the best outcome? But like, what does that mean? Like, go define that. Like, how do you even begin unpacking that in a regulator's seat?
My personal view on this question is that this is bigger than the regulators. I think the regulators have to operate within the existing laws that are written, and they interpret those laws to the best of their ability. And if you think about the construction of ERISA, it is founded on a system of independent corporate actors with their own plans, their own fiduciaries, their own priorities, right? That's the whole basis of ERISA. So this takes you beyond that to say, shouldn't we have a system that's more centralized, that is able to deliver a more seamless experience for participants, irrespective of their employer? And I think that's something for Congress to take up. And I think that you've seen that model certainly implemented in other countries, but some of the questions that we're asking get to the very core and the very essence of the way we've designed our system. And I think we need major legislative change to make that happen.
So I agree with that completely. And I hope that conversations like this are helping to build awareness and the consensus that we as different stakeholders in an interesting and important industry can start coalescing around some of those activities and make it easier to get there. So we've got about 4 minutes left. I want to try to do two things in those 4 minutes. One, get a lightning round question with two questions, so like 30 seconds. Will PEPs and MEPs lead to scale and innovation? Question number one. And question number two, how can tech support coaching and advising, especially for informed and financially aware users? And if you think about something like Mint, right, and its ability to help aggregate, like how can we, so try to pack all that together in one 30-second answer. Go. Who wants to go first? Tim, I'll pick on you.
Okay, so the MEPs and PEPs, we did some studies early on to look at, the goal there is to close the coverage gap. It's not going to close it completely, but it will help close the coverage gap. So that's a good thing. I think that leaves room too for we mentioned earlier, the state-run retirement plans. I think all three, the private plans, the PEPs, and the state-run plans can live in the same universe. And you can see a natural progression, from incubator plans to small plans to larger plans. When it comes to fintech and the example of Mint and Plaid and other types of software, I think that is the wave of the future because it's the demand. It's bringing advice to the mass markets. It's not replacing the advisors. A lot of advisors think that. They think, oh, this is going to replace me. It's not. Really what it's doing is it's giving them broad reach to a population that potentially down the road, some of them will need more hand-holding. But you want to have an application that you can provide to everyone.
Okay, I hope you're right, and I hope that's what we see. Michael, you wanna just give us your thoughts maybe on those last questions and maybe kind of give us some thoughts we can walk away with here?
I just think there's been a great discussion. I think just in terms of some of the meta issues that we deal with in retirement, access is one I think technology can really help with. You just have to remember there are millions of Americans that do not have access to a plan. And there are a lot of these initiatives that we've talked about, the state-run plans, the PEPs and MEPs. That was the intention. That was a policy drive behind those things. And hopefully they will address that problem. As Tim said, it's not going to entirely close the gap, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think you have to get people in the system before you can ask the question, are they saving enough if they're not saving at all? So right. I do think these issues of access first and adequacy, are people saving enough? I think these are areas where technology can make a real difference. And we talked about a lot of those innovations today.
Mira, final thoughts here?
PEPs and MEPs will certainly increase coverage. That's how I see it. And to your second question on advisory, and can we have a Mint type solution for retirement? Absolutely, yes. I tend to agree with Tim when it may not replace, but I can tell you when I started, say, contributing to 401k, this technology, these kind of tools did not exist. So if we give those tools to that population and provide them intelligent advice using technology, it is going to increase coverage, much like Pepsin do.
I think that is a fabulous note to close on. I think it's one of optimism and hope. I think we'll hit a few frustrating bumps in the road getting there, but I do think, as I view how this industry has evolved over the past decade, for sure, there are so many people in so many places actively working to bring some of these innovations to life, and I'm looking forward to helping us achieve that. So thank you all for a fascinating conversation, and thank you again to the Aspen Institute for convening us.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Bye.